Dear colleagues, please take your seat. 经济及社会理事会主席
President of the Economic and Social Council, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Assistant Secretary General for the DGACM, Excellencies, distinguished ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I call to order the second meeting of the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development. Item 1, Election of Officers. I invite the Commission to turn its attention to Item 1 of its provisional agenda, Election of Officers, and proceed with the elections of the Chair of the Commission. The Commission may wish to recall that, in accordance with the principle of equitable geographical rotation among the 5 regional groups, it is the term of the Western European and other states to hold the chairmanship of this 56th session. Members of the Commission will further recall that during the first meeting of the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development on February 10, 2017, the election of the Chair of the Commission for the 56th session was postponed. Subsequently, the Western European and other states endorsed the candidature of Mr. Nicholas Hannigan, Deputy Permanent Representative of Iceland to the UN, as Chair of the 56th session of the Commission. In the absence of any further nominations, may I take it that the Commission wishes to elect by acclamation Mr. Nicholas Hannigan of Iceland as Chair of the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development. I hear no objection. It is so decided. It is my pleasure to declare Mr. Nicholas Hannigan, Deputy Permanent Representative of Iceland to the United Nations, as Chair of the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development, and I invite him to take his seat on the podium.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Madam President of the Economic and Social Council, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Assistant Secretary General for General Assembly and Conference Management, Excellencies, Distinguished Vice President, distinguished ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly an honor for me to be elected as chair of the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development and to resume the second meeting of the Commission. I extend a very warm welcome to everyone here. I'm very pleased to see the level of enthusiasm in the room, the very high level of attendance. And I very much look forward to this important 56th session of the Commission for Social Development. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I now invite the Commission to again turn its attention to Agenda Item 1 of the provisional agenda, election of officers, in order to elect the other members of the Bureau. The Commission will recall that at the first meeting last year, it had elected Mr. Zhao Xiaojun of China, Ms. Elisabetta David of Romania, and Mr. Bruno Rios of Mexico to serve as vice chairs of the 56th session and postponed the election of the vice chair from the African states. Subsequently, Ms. David resigned from her position as vice chair. I'm pleased to inform the Commission that the African states have endorsed the candidature of His Excellency Ambassador Lot Dzonzi of Malawi, and that the Eastern European states have endorsed the candidature of Ms. Mihaela Mecea of Romania as the vice chairs of the 56th session. In the absence of any other candidates, may I take it that the Commission wishes to elect by acclamation His Excellency Lot Dzonzi of Malawi and Ms. Mihaela Mecea of Romania as vice chairs of the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development. Thank you. On behalf of the Commission, I would then like to congratulate His Excellency Lot Dzonzi of Malawi and Ms. Mihaela Mecea of Romania on their election. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank my fellow Bureau members for their hard work and support throughout the preparations for this session of the Commission. I also wish to inform the Commission that following consultations within the Bureau, it has been agreed that our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Mihaela Mecea of Romania, will also assume the responsibilities of rapporteur for this session of the Commission. And I congratulate Ms. Mihaela Mecea on this appointment. I now invite the Commission to turn its attention to Agenda Item 2, entitled Adoption of the Agenda and Other Organizational Matters. The provisional agenda for the session is contained in document E/CN.5/2018/1 and Corrigendum 1, and the proposed organization of work is before you in Annex 1 to the same document. I invite the Commission to first consider the provisional agenda for this session as contained in document E/CN.5/2018/1 and Corrigendum 1. The provisional agenda and the documentation for the 56th session were approved by the Economic and Social Council in its decision 2017/231. May I take it that the Commission wishes to adopt the provisional agenda? I hear no objections. The agenda is adopted. Distinguished colleagues, I now invite the Commission to turn to the proposed organisation of work as contained in Annex 1 to document E/CN.5/2018/1 and Corrigendum 1. I would like to make the following proposal concerning the time limits for statements during the general discussion. Statements on behalf of groups shall not exceed 12 minutes. Statements by individual delegations shall not exceed 7 minutes. Statements by IGOs and UN systems shall not exceed 5 minutes, and statements by NGOs shall not exceed 3 minutes. May I take it that the Commission wishes to approve my proposal and the draft organisation of work contained in Annex 1 on the understanding that further adjustments will be made if necessary during the course of the session? I hear no objections. It is so decided. I also wish to remind delegations that the deadline for submission of all draft proposals to the Secretariat is this coming Friday, 2nd of February at 3 p.m. I would also like to appeal to all speakers to adhere strictly to the time limits, and I thank you in advance for your cooperation. I now invite the Commission to begin its consideration of Agenda Item 3, entitled Follow-up to the World Summit for Social Development and the 24th Special Session of the General Assembly. Sub-Item A, Priority Theme, Strategies for Eradicating Poverty to Achieve Sustainable Development for All. Sub-Item B, Review of relevant United Nations plans and programs of action pertaining to the situation of social groups, and sub-item C, emerging issues towards sustainable and resilient societies, innovation and interconnectivity for social development. The documentation under Agenda Item 3 is in today's journal. Before going any further, if you will allow me, I would like to make my own opening statement. Honourable Ministers, Deputy Secretary General, Madam President of ECOSOC and Under Secretary General Mr. Liu, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this 56th session comes at a critical point. The Commission has a responsibility to promote the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, especially the social dimension of this agenda. With your cooperation and support, I'm confident that the Commission is very well placed to make significant contributions to addressing the social dimensions of this agenda. The success of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, with its pledge to leave no one behind, depends on empowering young people, persons with disabilities, older persons, indigenous peoples, and families as rights holders and agents of change. Excellencies, colleagues, this Commission's mandate is rooted in social justice and development for all. Since 1995, it has been entrusted with following up the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development and the Programme of Action of the World Summit for Social Development. Both the 2030 Agenda and the World Summit for Social Development are committed to seeking lasting solutions to eradicate the scourge of extreme poverty, creating full employment and decent work for all, and building more inclusive societies. Hence, our work constitutes the basic framework for the promotion of social development for all at the national and international levels. The Commission is also tasked with promoting the continued global dialogue on social development issues, including new and emerging issues that have a bearing on the promise of the 2030 Agenda to leave no one behind. Among the many pressing challenges we face is increasing inequality within and among nations. Inequality's resurgence should be a concern to all of us, and this Commission should contribute to combating it. According to the World Inequality Report 2018, the top 1% in the world had twice as much income growth as the bottom half since 1980. Oxfam's new report, Reward Work, Not Wealth, also reveals that the world's wealthiest 1% captured 82% of the wealth generated in 2017, while the bottom 50%, or 3.7 billion people, who make up the poorest half of the world, saw no increase in it at all. So how can we fulfill the promise of the 2030 Agenda to leave no one behind in the face of such major inequities? Tackling such challenges will require effective social policies and strategies. This means creating decent jobs at a sufficient pace to absorb a growing labour force, increased investments in quality and accessible education and health, investments in agriculture and rural development, infrastructure, and greater social protection schemes. We also need adequate means of implementation from domestic resources, private sector investments, and official development assistance. In an increasingly globalized and interconnected world, we must also ensure that the benefits of globalization are shared by all and that we effectively respond to the ongoing threats posed by climate change. The Commission can make headway in these areas by redoubling our efforts to integrate the social, economic, and environmental pillars of sustainable development. Distinguished delegates, we therefore have a responsibility to strengthen the social pillar of sustainable development. I'm therefore particularly pleased by the thematic focus of the high-level panel discussions we are having this week, beginning this afternoon with the high-level panel on the priority theme, Strategies for Eradicating Poverty to Achieve Sustainable Development for All. This will be followed in the afternoon of Tuesday, 30th January, with a high-level panel discussion on the emerging issue theme towards sustainable and resilient societies, innovation and interconnectivity for social development, and then by a panel discussion in the morning of Wednesday the 31st on the third review and appraisal of the Madrid Plan of Action on Aging, and finally a panel discussion on the afternoon of that day on towards inclusive, resilient and sustainable development, an evidence-based approach to the mainstreaming of disability in the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the Agenda 2030. The Commission will also consider issues pertaining to the social dimensions of the new Partnership for Africa's Development and the situation of persons with disabilities, youth, older persons, and the family. The Commission will also hear a presentation by a civil society representative and a youth representative from the ECOSOC Youth Forum during the opening session. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as this is the policy session in the two-year cycle of the Commission's work, the expected outcome of this session on the priority theme will be an action-oriented resolution. Let us seize this opportunity and strengthen international cooperation in implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, building upon the achievements of the World Summit for Social Development and of the Millennium Development Goals, and seeking to address their unfinished business in a coherent manner. Let us also ensure that this year's resolution on the priority theme places a strong emphasis on social policies and strategies that have proved effective at eradicating poverty in all its forms everywhere, including extreme poverty. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the work in front of us is important and challenging, and I very much look forward to the active participation of all delegations, civil society organizations, and the United Nations system in this important endeavor. Let us move ahead to ensure that the program of work of this Commission remains relevant going forward and contributes effectively to the work of the Economic and Social Council and the high-level political forum. I am therefore looking forward to the Commission's deliberations, and I intend to transmit the outcomes and policy recommendations of this session as inputs to ECOSOC in my capacity as Chair of the Commission. Thank you, and I look forward to a very productive Commission. Thank you very much. It is now my distinct pleasure to welcome the President of the Economic and Social Council, Her Excellency Mary Shatadova, and I invite her to address the Commission.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chair of the Bureau of the Commission for Social Development, Madam Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to everybody. It is my pleasure to join you today at the opening of the first ECOSOC Functional Commission to meet this year. I believe that your work will set an example for the success of all the other commissions that will gather in later months to deliberate on development-related issues. The Economic and Social Council is at the heart of the United Nations system to advance sustainable development, and this Commission plays an essential role in supporting and implementing the 1995 World Summit on Social Development and the social dimension of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Progress in social development helps to build more inclusive and resilient societies, strengthen peace and security, and protect our planet. Therefore, the work of this Commission is central to our vision of a more inclusive, equitable, sustainable, and prosperous future. In this policy year, in your two-year review and policy cycle, your work will result in an action-oriented outcome on the priority theme, strategies for eradicating poverty to achieve sustainable development for all. This theme is timely and important for two main reasons. First, it is at the center of the 2030 Agenda. The first of the Sustainable Development Goals is to end poverty in all its forms by 2030. Second, your deliberations focusing on strategies for eradicating poverty to achieve sustainable development for all will contribute to the 2018 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development with the theme of transformation towards sustainable and resilient societies. Your work will enhance the integration of the social, economic, and environmental pillars of sustainable development and ensure that efforts become more responsive to the myriad needs of the most vulnerable countries, the poor, and people in vulnerable situations. Your discussions on policies and strategies for poverty eradication and on issues of leaving no one behind, as well as the guidance you offer to member states, matter. The policy recommendations emanating from your deliberations will contribute to today's generation becoming the one that eradicates poverty and turns the tide on inequality, exclusion, and environmental degradation. As you are aware, the 2018 ECOSOC Youth Forum will start tomorrow. The theme of the forum, the role of youth in building sustainable and resilient urban and rural communities, complements your own work on the youth agenda. The timing of the two events is therefore most propitious. We should build synergies between the work of the Commission and the Forum. As in the past, the Forum will provide space for young people to have a dialogue with member states on their vision for a sustainable future and evaluate progress in achieving the 2030 Agenda, including those SDGs that will be reviewed by the high-level political forum. I note with gratitude that a youth representative will be joining you later this week to report on the outcome of the Youth Forum. I also intend to share my presidential statement, which I will issue on the outcome of the forum with the chair of the Commission later this week. I hope that you will take some of these messages on board as you proceed with your work. There are other noteworthy developments this year that I need to bring to your attention. This quarter, the General Assembly will proceed with both the review of Resolution 68/1 and the revitalization of the General Assembly. It is important that all ECOSOC functional commissions deepen their efforts to work across the boundaries set by their original mandates. The ECOSOC Bureau and I stand ready to provide greater guidance on this. Let me conclude by congratulating the Commission on the review of strategies for eradicating poverty that it achieved last year, and look forward to your policy contributions to the integration segment of the Economic and Social Council with the theme of innovative communities, leveraging technology and innovation to build sustainable and resilient societies, as well as the main theme of the Council and the HLPF this year. In the important work that awaits you during this session, I wish you every success and want to reiterate that you have the unfailing support of the Economic and Social Council and Department of Economic and Social Affairs with 70 years of experience behind it. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the President of the Economic and Social Council for her statement, and I now have the honor to invite Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Ms. Amina Mohammed, to address the Commission.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Mr. Nicolaus Hannigan, Chair of the Bureau of the Commission of Social Development, Your Excellency, the President of ECOSOC, my colleague, the US Chief of DESA, our Chair of the NGO Committee, and last but absolutely not least, our youth representative here on the panel. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to participate at the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development. The theme this year's gathering, Strategies for Eradicating Poverty to Achieve Sustainable Development for All. This is particularly timely as we seek transformative actions to achieve the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. The new agenda builds on progress since the World Summit for Social Development in 1995 and on achievements under the Millennium Development Goals, still the unfinished business of the United Nations. National development policies are now more likely to place people at the center of development. We've achieved impressive reductions in extreme poverty and major improvements in providing access to schooling and health care, and promoting empowerment of women, youth, persons with disabilities, older persons, and indigenous populations. However, the drop in extreme poverty remains uneven across regions, within countries, and between various social groups. Furthermore, while more than 1 billion people have risen above the $1.90 a day line since 1990, millions have slid back into poverty annually because of the economic, environmental, health, or other shocks. Of particular concern are the persistently high levels of poverty and deprivation amongst women and children, indigenous groups, older persons, and those with disabilities. Unemployment and underemployment among the world's young people remains unacceptably high, and many are working in vulnerable jobs with low pay and poor conditions, making our youth even more vulnerable to the recruiting grounds of the new scourge of terrorism. Furthermore, inequality between and within countries remains exceptionally high and has worsened in some cases, particularly in our middle-income countries. This Commission has a key role to play in addressing these challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, the overarching objective of the 2030 Agenda to eradicate poverty in all its forms and dimensions requires that all countries promote the empowerment and participation of people living in poverty and vulnerable situations. We must also look to the root cause of poverty through a multidimensional and holistic approach. We must also work with context, country, level, and regional, dealing these days with conflicts, migration, climate change, and famine that know no borders. It is imperative that we promote social policies and protection that ensure the benefits of globalization are just and economic growth are shared by all and lift all boats. Safety nets will be crucial, as are measures to raise household incomes and promote decent work. Globally, 45% of the people who need social protection have access to just one social benefit, while the rest, some 4 billion people, go without. This is unacceptable and underscores the challenge we face in upholding our promise to leave no one behind. To fulfill that vision, I encourage the Commission to emphasize the imperative of accelerating inclusive and equitable economic growth and sustainable development, including full, productive employment and decent work for all. Progress in these areas will contribute to reducing inequalities within and among countries. The work of this Commission will also guide the Secretary-General's efforts to reposition the United Nations Development System to deliver on the 2030 Agenda, including those enhanced results at the country level. In that regard, we will look to continue to the Commission to serve as a space for policy debate and the sharing of experiences aimed at mobilizing action at all levels. We must also underscore the importance of supporting our governments and partners at the country level to achieve the 2030 Agenda, which is the most comprehensive roadmap we have yet for the eradication of poverty. And we must put a special role for young people, encouraging entrepreneurs to achieve their aspirations and to be part of the actualization of Agenda 2030. Distinguished delegates, the upcoming adoption by the Commission of a resolution on your methods of work is an important step that will establish the Commission's enhanced role for the period ahead, in particular its alignment and reinforcement of the high-level political forum. If the Commission on Social Development is to remain relevant, then it must develop the tools that will galvanize our efforts to achieve fair globalization and overcome poverty, inequality, and exclusion. While the review and implementation of the World Summit for Social Development remains central to your work, I do encourage you to be creative and to prioritize accelerating action to achieve the 2030 Agenda and to support the work of the high-level political forum. The Secretary-General and I look forward to the outcomes of this session and we reiterate our commitment to continuing to work with you and our partners to reach those left furthest behind. I thank you.
I thank the Deputy Secretary-General for her important message to the Commission, and particularly her words of encouragement on review of our working methods. I'm pleased to invite Under-Secretary-General for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Liu Zhenmin, to make a statement. Under-Secretary-General, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Madam President of CSocD, Madam Deputy Secretary-General, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start my remarks by warmly congratulating the opening of the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development. The priority theme of the 2017 to 2018 policy cycle of the Commission for Social Development is strategies for eradicating poverty to achieve sustainable development for all. This theme has a high relevance to supporting member states in their implementation of the outcomes of 1995 World Summit on Social Development, as well as the social dimension of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The 2030 Agenda has poverty eradication at its core. The eradication of poverty is both a stand-alone goal and the overarching theme mainstreamed throughout the Agenda 2030. As our collective blueprint for sustainable development in the years ahead, the 2030 Agenda recognizes poverty as a multidimensional phenomenon. It highlights that people living in poverty and vulnerable situations face barriers that hinder their ability to escape poverty, such as a lack of access to education, health care, clean water and sanitation, affordable food, and decent jobs. It guides us to eradicate poverty in all its forms and everywhere. Excellencies, the Commission is now meeting at a time when the global economy continues to show signs of improvement. The global economy is experiencing the highest rate of growth since 2011, and is expected to retain its 3% growth rate through 2019. These improving economic conditions benefit many countries, with about two-thirds of all countries seeing stronger growth this year compared to last year. But as we well know, economic growth is not enough. While nearly 1.1 billion people have risen from extreme poverty since 1990, many are still living barely above the absolute poverty line. They are at risk of sliding back into poverty if impacted by disaster, illness, loss of a job, or lack of social protection. The global unemployment level also remains high at 5.8%, with no prospect of decline in the near term, impacting more than 201 million people. Among these, an estimated 71 million youths are also unemployed, and another 160 million youths are working but still living in poverty. This Commission has long advocated for people-centered and integrated approaches to social development that are needed to overcome these challenges. Since 1995 World Summit for Social Development, this Commission has been a vital global platform for sharing good policies and practices and exchange of information and knowledge and social policies and development aimed at eradicating poverty, combating inequality, fostering job creation, investing in education and health, and scaling up the provision of social protection. We now have an urgent task of implementing these policies and strategies in the context of the 2030 Agenda. Distinguished delegates, in the past decade, we have learned important lessons. First, it is crucial to develop a comprehensive and integrated socio-economic policy framework to eradicate poverty, supported by strong institutions, broad-based participation, and evidence-based policy making. As the report of the World Social Situation has shown over the years, where growth has created sufficient productive employment and decent work, its benefits have been more equitably distributed. At the same time, where inequalities have declined or remained at low levels, economic growth has been faster and more sustained. This is a good experience. Second, we need to create productive employment and decent work for all. We must address informality, irregular employment, low skills, low productivity, and low wage types by facilitating the transition from the informal to formal employment and creating decent employment opportunities, including in rural and remote areas. Third, we must invest in people to enhance their well-being and productive capacities so that they become healthier and equipped with necessary skills to access decent work opportunities. This will require investments in social infrastructure and human resources. Fourth, we must build the resilience of people living in poverty, people in vulnerable situations, and countries most vulnerable to climate change. Fifth and finally, social protection systems are essential in mitigating risks and preventing people from falling into poverty. Social transfer programs, such as cash transfers, can help poor families to escape intergenerational poverty, but maintaining their sustainability remains a problem. So well-established social protection systems in all countries need to be further enhanced. Distinguished delegates, since the adoption of 2030 Agenda, about 113 countries have presented their voluntary national reviews till 2018. Preliminary findings reveals that there are good progress, as well as serious gaps and challenges in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in many countries. In the forthcoming 13 years, we should bear in mind that eradicating poverty will remain top priority in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm convinced that this Commission can make valuable contributions to support Member States in their implementation of the 2030 Agenda. We must work together and intensify our efforts to eradicate poverty everywhere so that all people can live a life with dignity. I look forward to your forthcoming deliberations and outcome of the session. I wish you all have a successful second session. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the Undersecretary General of the Economic and Social Affairs for his statement, and I would like to now invite Mr. Daniel Perel, Chair of the NGO Committee for Social Development, to make a statement. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair of the Commission for Social Development, Madam President of ECOSOC, Madam Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Undersecretary General of DESA, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor to share, on behalf of the NGO Committee for Social Development, a few thoughts on the concept of shared prosperity and the means by which it can be advanced. The global agendas adopted in recent years, Agenda 2030 preeminent among them, are explicitly universal in nature. In them can be seen the international community's recognition that humanity's collective life suffers when any one group thinks of its own well-being in isolation from that of its neighbors. Rejection of this foundational truth leads to ills that are all too familiar. Self-interest prevails at the expense of the common good. Unconscionable quantities of wealth are amassed, mirrored by reprehensible depths of destitution. These extremes are then perpetuated as opportunity gaps in education, healthcare, employment are exacerbated both between and within nations. And in this respect, we would humbly propose that this Commission become the home for Goal 10 to reduce inequalities within and among countries. To eradicate poverty, to achieve sustainable development for all, requires more than mere policy modifications at the margins. Coherent strategies for the establishment of shared prosperity can only be implemented concurrent with an objective assessment of both the program's merit as well as its values and incentives. One place to start would be to build on the consensus regarding human dignity. According to the NGO Committee for Social Development, a clear line can be drawn from human dignity to social protection, inasmuch as social protection can foster the broadest and deepest possible participation in the economic and social life of society. In recent years, social protection has emerged as a unifying concept at the UN, among member states, and civil society for an array of measures aimed at building fairer and more inclusive societies. The concept of social protection expresses basic precepts about which broad and strong consensus can be found around the world. Among these, that all humans have dignity and worth by virtue of being human, that governments have a role to play in ensuring dignity is maintained, that there are thresholds which a community, whether local, national, regional, or international, will refuse to let any of its members fall below. Convictions such as these, founded on the most basic and universal conceptions of human worth, lie at the heart of social protection, as articulated in the SDGs, ILO Recommendation 202, and civil society's declaration to this Commission, which will be finalized after the Civil Society Forum on Friday, to which you are all warmly invited. Steps undertaken at the national level to provide those aspirational conditions for all citizens is but the logical conclusion of this consensus. Of course, the particular implementation of any social protection scheme must be the subject of rigorous research and thoughtful deliberation. The precise details must vary from context to context. To be effective, they must continually take into account not only the needs and challenges of local populations, but also their capacities, resources, and aspirations. In this, the meaningful participation of affected populations is a prerequisite to success. For this reason, it is important to recognize that any given social protection scheme, be it floors, pensions, cash transfers, or any other, are not ends in themselves, but means to bring about social conditions that allow for the flourishing of communities. The ends that social protection schemes might be directed towards are many, but a few can be identified for initial consideration. Social protection is a means of nurturing a societal ethic of reciprocity and a sense of responsibility to one another. It is by nature a shared endeavor involving a wide and continually growing array of stakeholders, protagonists of their own lives. Social protection broadens and deepens the social contract, promoting a greater understanding that the well-being of the individual is ultimately dependent upon and contributes to the well-being of the whole. Few would disagree that we live in a fraught political period with questions arising around the world about the functioning of political systems, the direction of society, the path toward collective well-being. In such an environment, it will be useful to emphasize that social protection is not a partisan issue. It belongs neither to the North nor the South, the right nor the left. This consensus should be the starting point for its implementation. In fact, it is key to its success. Ultimately, the protections of individuals, communities, and societies hinges on questions of values at the deepest levels. Social protection speaks to the sort of society in which all fair-minded people wish to live, one in which fears of being unable to survive, thrive, and pass on a better world to one's children would no longer darken any person's horizons. Regardless of the challenges we face, the NGO Committee for Social Development has the utmost confidence that every single member state wishes such prosperity and well-being for their people. And in this, civil society stands ready to offer any assistance it can in ensuring that every citizen of the world is provided those conditions by which they can make their fullest contribution to the progress of all. I thank you.
I thank the chair of the NGO Committee for Social Development for his statement. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Luis Alvarado Martinez, Youth Representative, to make his statement. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, Good morning, everyone. I'm here today addressing you not only as youth representative, but as president of the European Youth Forum, the regional platform representing the voices of young people. I really thank everybody here for making the space and giving young people the opportunity to be part of the conversation. Hopefully, I'll be able to give you reasons why we should continue that. As society, we cannot hope to eradicate poverty and achieve sustainable development without addressing the rights and needs of the world's largest generation of young people. Globally, it is difficult to be sure how many young people are living in poverty. We know that in 2003, nearly 500 million young people aged 15 to 24 were living on less than $2 a day. But 15 years later, those 15 to 24 years old are now 30 to 39-year-olds and are no longer considered young in many parts of the world or in most statistics. In strategies for eradicating poverty, it is vital that we understand the importance of data collection and data desegregation. How can we have effective strategies for poverty eradication if we don't know how to target those strategies? Lack of data on the most vulnerable and the most marginalized makes them invisible. We cannot treasure what we cannot measure. What we can be sure about is that young people are amongst the most affected by austerity measures and cuts in social investments. In OECD countries, children and young adults are 25% more likely to be poor than population as a whole. These stark facts and figures are evidence that we need strategies for eradicating poverty that include the youth perspective and target young people. However, poverty cannot be tackled through any one measure. Poverty is multidimensional. It follows that strategies and policies targeting poverty require diverse and multi-level responses. This is all the more true for young people as the transition from childhood to adulthood presents complex and challenging circumstances. We know that if poverty is not tackled early within an individual's life, it can become systemic, not only affecting that individual, but also generations to come. Tackling poverty amongst young people requires a holistic perspective and approach. Crucially, the rights of each young person must be at the core. In recent years, there's been a great deal of attention to the situation of young people in the labor market. Youth unemployment is undeniably an important challenge that requires an urgent and a scaled-up response. For a young person who's unemployed, the lack of a job can lead to poverty. For a young person who's already living in poverty, accessing labor market is all the more difficult. But policies promoting youth unemployment are far from enough to address poverty among young people. In work, poverty is a serious concern for young people around the world. From Belize to Belgium to Benin, in sub-Saharan Africa, youth working poverty rates stand at almost 70%. It is clear that jobs alone are not the answer. Young people need access to jobs of quality, to adequate and fair remuneration, and social protection. And yet, our experience in Europe shows that young people time and again face discrimination in securing quality jobs and accessing that social protection. We are denied access to our economic and social rights. Even in countries with universal social protection, young people face social security systems that discriminate us on the basis of our age or inadequate for current realities we face. Young people are expected to be flexible and embrace new forms of work or to create our own jobs as young entrepreneurs, and yet we do not have the access to the protection we need to take on these challenges. Young people are much more likely to be in precarious, insecure, low-quality work than older workers. It is clear that we need fair, just, and updated social protection systems. Age-based discrimination in access to minimum wages, social protection, and social security systems must be consistent to history. In calling for this, it's not my intention to put different generations against each other. That's not the aim here. As Christine Lagarde from the International Monetary Fund wrote last week, building an economy that works for young people creates stronger foundations for everyone. We must work to build an economy and a society that work for young people if we hope to eradicate poverty. Young people are systematically underrepresented in the political arena and are often being excluded from decisions that affect us. Now we've seen a change here. So we face discrimination and barriers in accessing our civil and political rights. We face, generally, a lack of power as a generation. that if we hope to eradicate poverty, young people must not only be a target group of strategies and actions, but be full participants in the development, implementation, and its evaluation. Young people must be meaningfully engaged in decision-making at all levels and in all circumstances, through dedicated channels for our voices, concerns, and realities to be heard by decision-makers. Young people are more at risk of poverty and social exclusion than other population groups, but not every young person has experienced or will experience poverty in their lifetime. Inequality between and within countries means that the risk and experience of poverty will be different from a young person in Sudan than a young person in Spain, my home country, or for a young woman than for a young man, or for a young migrant and a young person remaining in the country of birth. To tackle poverty, measures and strategies that lift up the young generation as a whole are needed, but measures are also needed to tackle inequality and multiple discrimination, and target those young people who are most vulnerable and most marginalized and most left behind. It is clear that tackling poverty comprehensively cannot be done through a focus only of SDG 1. The eradication of poverty will not be achieved by only addressing poverty itself, as a multitude of social, environmental, and economic factors that can prevent people from escaping poverty or push them back. The 2030 Agenda must be addressed in its entirety. If we are to have any hope of eradicating that poverty, it must be certainly addressed in its entirety if we are able to have any hope of achieving sustainable development for all. And I finish. We must never forget that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is an agenda with its basis in human rights, one that commits to leave no one behind, partnering with young people to ensure that all of our rights are fully respected and fulfilled will be absolutely essential to ensure that we are recognized as a resource for change in the fight against poverty and achievement of the 2030 Agenda. So I encourage this Commission to take into account the youth perspective and the rights and needs of this largest generation of young people in your conversation. So let's jointly work to achieve a better outcome and a future free of the tyranny of poverty for our generation and those to come. Imagine what we could all do together if young people were full part of this conversation. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Mr. Martinez for his presentation, particularly for the eloquent presentation, forceful presentation of the importance of, key importance of addressing poverty among young people. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask for your patience while I briefly pause this meeting to allow our distinguished guest speakers to leave. We just need to make one or two adjustments to the podium. A brief pause. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, could I ask you please to take your seats as we continue our opening session. Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, that'd be great if you can, yeah. So I just say, Her Excellency the Minister. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, it is now my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Daniela Bass, Director of the Division for Social Policy and Development of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and she will introduce the documents under Agenda Item 3 as a whole. Director, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is a real honor to address the 56th session of the Commission for Social Development in my capacity as the Director of the Division for Social Policy and Development of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. The Deputy Secretary General, the President of ECOSOC, and the Undersecretary General of DESA, Mr. Liu, have focused on key issues of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as they relate to social development and on the role of the Commission for Social Development in addressing many important issues that are really crucial for achieving the 2030 Agenda. And I will focus my remarks to introducing the reports of the Secretary General under consideration in the Agenda Item 3, sub-items A, B, and C. First of all, I would like to draw your attention to Item 3A, entitled Follow-up to the World Summit for Social Development and the 24th Special Session of the General Assembly. And it focuses on the priority theme that you will be discussing throughout these days, that is strategies for eradicating poverty to achieving sustainable development for all. And the report of the SG is contained in the document ECN.5/2018/3. Eradicating poverty is the overarching objective of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and one of the core objectives of the World Summit for Social Development. So the report provides a wide range of progress made to date to eradicate poverty and discusses the strategies and policies that countries are implementing to eradicate poverty for all people everywhere. In drawing lessons from progress made by countries, the report emphasizes that achieving this goal requires political commitment and realistic and determined social and economic policy making and implementation. It also requires adequate means of implementation, sustaining peace and security, combating rising inequalities, mitigating and adapting to climate change, and ensuring inclusive globalizations, as well as harnessing opportunities presented by technological change and growing interconnectivity. So the report also notes that to eradicate poverty, particular attention must be given to supporting the development efforts of Africa and the least developed countries, as it is recognized by the World Summit for Social Development as well as the 2030 Agenda. What are the policy priorities for poverty eradication? This is a question we ask ourselves when we prepared on behalf of the Secretary General this report. Ensuring policy coherence and more coordination across the sectors in line with the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Policy coordination at all levels and among all stakeholders would require strong political commitment and implementation capacity. In designing policies and measures, countries should build on existing experiences and focus on applying different bundles of strategies that fit different stages of development and national contexts. Mr. Chairman, I would like now to introduce the report of the Secretary General on the social dimension of the new Partnership for Africa's Development. The report makes several key recommendations. I will mention only a few. 1. Prioritize promoting structural transformation, investing in agriculture, and scaling up the provision of social protection schemes, including social protection floors. 2. Stimulate sustained and inclusive economic growth, as well as social development. African countries are encouraged to increase investments in quality education and health, as well as in skills development. 3rd, invest in world-class infrastructures and deepen domestic resource mobilization, including by curbing illicit financial flows. And finally, the report encourages the international community, including the United Nations system, to continue to support the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the African Union Agenda 2063 in a coherent and an efficient manner. I would like to introduce now another report, Mr. Chairman, which is the review of relevant United Nations plans and programs of action pertaining to the situation of social groups. This is something I would like to highlight when it comes to poverty and inequalities experienced by persons with disabilities that are often a result of barriers in the structural, social, political, and cultural environments. This theme will be discussed, as you mentioned earlier on, in a panel discussion that is going to be held on Wednesday, the 31st of January, where a discussion will be held on towards inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development as evidence-based approach to the mainstreaming of disability in the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the 2030 Agenda. Mr. Chairman, I would like now to bring the attention also to another Secretary General report, which is about the 3rd review and appraisal of the Madrid Plan of Action on Aging 2002, which is contained in document ES/CN.5 2018-4. This report presents the conclusions of the 3rd review and appraisal exercise that has been carried out by member states, and it has been coordinated through the regional commissions. And the report provides an overview of the review and appraisal processes that took place in each country and in each region. It identifies the key major trends and roadblocks to the implementation across regions within the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of the Madrid Plan of Action, and the implementation of which the United Nations system is now focusing on supporting. As well as in this report, you will find identified future areas of focus for the regional policies that are being developed. The recommendations contained in this report for the consideration of member states include, and I would like to mention again just a few, strengthening the further implementation of the Madrid Plan of Action on Aging as a modality for the inclusion of older persons in the implementation and attainment of the 2030 Agenda. Another one is considering the successes and good practices, as well as the shortcomings and future priorities identified at national, regional levels in furthering the implementation of the Madrid Plan of Action. And the 3rd one requests the regional commissions to continue to facilitate, including through their intergovernmental bodies, the further implementation of the Madrid Plan of Action based on the priorities that are being identified in the respective outcomes of the region's review and appraisals exercises that took place throughout the previous year. So, Mr. Chairman, for consideration under this agenda item, there is another report prepared by the Secretary General on the implementation of the objectives of the International Year of the Family and its follow-up processes. This report focuses on recent initiatives towards creating national frameworks and institutions for the design, the implementation, and monitoring of family policies as well as family programs. It highlights specifically family policies to reduce poverty, hunger, and social exclusion. It further describes efforts promoting work-family balance and empowerment of women and girls, as well as policies to enhance social integration and intergenerational solidarity. The report also notes the needs and trends in promoting family-related research and awareness-raising activities at national and regional levels. United Nations systems as well as civil societies, of course, are considered in their efforts in promoting policy development, and you will find them there. And it urges member states to recognize that family-oriented policies and programs are integral and key for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, particularly in eradicating poverty and hunger, promoting well-being and lifelong learning opportunities for all, and achieving equality. The last one I would like to share, Mr. Chairman, is by introducing Agenda Item 3 entitled Emerging Issues. This year's theme is Towards Sustainable and Resilient Societies, Innovation and Interconnectivity for Social Development. A note by the Secretariat is contained in the document ECN 5-2018-5, and it has been prepared to facilitate discussions on this item. In the note, we have identified a few trends, emerging trends in innovation and technology. And the note highlights the opportunities as well as the challenges they present in pursuing the objectives of the 2030 Agenda, and also in realizing the commitments of the agenda to leave no one behind. And the note concludes with a set of policy recommendations. At the global level, robust awareness raising of the benefits and potential risks of technological innovations on society is necessary. Proactive ethic policies should be developed to enhance accountability, transparency, and privacy at all stages when it comes to research and innovation. We need these three key elements. In anticipation of future job losses and job degradation, new and innovative forms of education, skills development, and knowledge acquisition should be promoted. Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, this concludes my introduction of the reports prepared for this commission, and I trust that you will find the main messages and recommendations of these reports useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director, for your statement and the valuable information you shared with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite the Commission to begin its general discussion of sub-item A, priority theme, strategies for eradicating poverty to achieve sustainable development for all, and sub-item B, review of the relevant United Nations plans and programs of action pertaining to the situation of social groups under Agenda Item 3. Before giving the floor to the first speaker, I would like to remind all delegations to kindly respect the agreed time limits, which I mentioned at the opening of this session. A digital speech timer is visible on the screen. Is it already? I think, yes, good. To assist speakers in managing their time, the digits on display will turn red 1 minute before the expiration of the time limit. So when you see red, you have a minute left. Moreover, the red light on the microphone will also start blinking when 1 minute is remaining as a signal or an invitation for the speaker kindly to move towards concluding their intervention. Having said that, it is now my pleasure to give the floor to the first speaker, and I give the floor to the distinguished Minister of Social Solidarity of Egypt. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. The group would like to congratulate you on assuming the chairmanship of the Commission for Social Development. We wish you and your Bureau a successful session, and we assure you of our full support and cooperation. The Group of 77 and China thank the Secretary General for his report, which will continue in informing our deliberations and discussions. Mr. Chair, building on the past work of the Commission for Social Development on eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, we are resuming this year our discussions over the strategies for eradicating poverty to achieve sustainable development for all. The implementation of the 2030 Agenda is one of the most relevant issues for developing countries. Goal 1 of the 2030 Agenda aims at ending poverty in all its forms and dimensions everywhere. This goal should not be considered as an individual goal, but with its interlinkages with the other goals in order to ensure the comprehensive implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Poverty eradication needs to be an integral objective of all policies and be addressed as a multidimensional phenomenon. Eradication of poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, remains the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development, particularly in Africa and in the least developed countries, in small island developing states, landlocked developing countries, and in middle-income countries, many of which still face specific challenges and are home to most of the world's population living in poverty. The Secretary General's report provides us with alarming statistics about the incidence of poverty, revealing that, despite tremendous progress in reducing global poverty, significant disparities remain across regions and within countries. It shows also that women, children, and older persons are the most affected by poverty, hunger has gone up, and inequality within and among countries has increased in many parts of the world, slowing or even halting the pace of poverty reduction. Mr. Chair, the Group of 77 and China reaffirms that the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development and the Program of Action of the World Summit for Social Development and the further initiatives for social development adopted by the General Assembly at its 24th special session, as well as continued global dialogue on social development issues, including the work of the Commission for Social Development, constitute the basic framework for the promotion of social development for all at the national, regional, and international levels. We are deeply concerned about the uneven progress achieved in fulfilling all of the interrelated commitments made at the World Summit for Social Development, and by the lack of progress in the field of social development. Conflicts, slowing global economic growth, inequality, volatile financial markets, high rates of youth unemployment, global health threats, humanitarian emergencies, corruption, the challenges posed by climate change and other related challenges increase the difficulty to advance and impede progress in the fulfillment of social objectives. It is crucial to meet these challenges in order to achieve and sustain progress in social development. The Group of 77 and China recognize that full and productive employment and decent work for all, which encompass social protection, fundamental principles and rights at work, ensure equal pay for equal work or work for equal value, tripartism, and social dialogue are key elements of sustainable development for all countries and are therefore an important objective of international cooperation and supports the promotion of innovative approaches in the design and implementation of employment policies and programs for all, including the long-term unemployed. The Group of 77 and China stressed the importance of strengthening social policies as appropriate, paying particular attention to the specific needs of disadvantaged social groups to ensure that these groups, inter alia children, youth, older persons, people with disabilities, people living with HIV/AIDS, indigenous peoples, migrants, refugees, internally displaced persons, and other people who are vulnerable or in vulnerable situations are not left behind. This can be achieved through the eradication of poverty in all its forms and dimensions, the achievement of full employment and decent work for all, including the creation of full and productive employment, social inclusion, and universal access to social services such as quality education, health care services, and social protection. Mr. Chair, we must also be reminded of our commitments to fulfill our obligations in conformity with the international law to remove obstacles to the full realization of the rights of people to self-determination in all cases where it is applicable. In particular, those living under colonial and foreign occupation and other forms of alien domination, which continue to adversely affect their socio-economic development, with full respect to national sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states. While we are reviewing for the third time the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, the Group of 77 and China recognizes the essential contribution that older persons make to the development of our societies. When adequate guarantees are in place, older persons are empowered as agents and beneficiaries of change and offer an undeniable support to collective development programs and projects, including the implementation of the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development and its Sustainable Development Goals. In the same context, the Group of 77 and China welcomes the results of the third review and appraisal cycle of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, conducted through the different regional commissions, and stresses the need to address the shortcomings identified with regards to the implementation of the plan of action on an urgent basis, in order to fully promote the social development of older persons. Since the adoption in 2001, the new Partnership for Africa's Development has provided a vision and policy framework for the development and integration of Africa into the world economy. The African Union's Transformative Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development are giving further impetus to the global aspiration for an inclusive, prosperous, and peaceful world where no one is left behind, particularly in Africa. The Group of 77 and China, while welcoming the progress achieved towards the achievement of the goals contained in Agenda 2063 and NEPAD, emphasizes that progress in their implementation depends also on a favorable national and international environment for Africa's growth and development. The Group of 77 and China continue to underscore the crucial role of international cooperation, including North-South cooperation, South-South cooperation as a complement, not a substitute to North-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. In realizing the internationally agreed upon development goals, and most importantly, in promoting the program of action of the Copenhagen Summit, the international community and development partners have a pivotal role to play in collaborating with and supporting developing countries in implementing their social development agenda. The group believes that our deliberations in the Commission for Social Development can feed into the HPLF discussions on transformation towards sustainable and resilient societies. We cannot have sustainable and resilient societies without eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, eliminating inequalities within and among countries, and providing social protection to all. Social policies should ensure that innovation, interconnectivity, and inclusion interact effectively, and that current and future technological advances serve to create inclusive and resilient societies. Finally, the Group of 77 and China stay committed to strengthen the work of the Commission for Social Development. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished Minister of Social Solidarity of Egypt, speaking on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, and I give the floor to His Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Bulgaria, speaking on behalf of the European Union. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate country is Turkey, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Serbia, Montenegro, and Albania. the country of the stabilization and the association process and potential candidate Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as the Republic of Moldova, Armenia, and Georgia, align themselves with this statement. First of all, we would like to thank the Bureau and the Department of Economic and Social Affairs for the preparatory work carried out in advance of this session. The Commission continues to have an important mandate as the principal UN forum for the discussion of social development issues, and we look forward to actively participating throughout the session. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development provides a historic opportunity for the EU and its member states to play a crucial role in ensuring sustainable development both in Europe and beyond its borders. Work is already underway in two work streams. The first is to fully integrate the Sustainable Development Goals in the European policy framework. This includes human capital and the social areas. The European Union has always been a social project at heart. It is about our values and the way we want to live. Indeed, our treaty requires the EU to work for sustainable development based on balanced economic growth and a social market economy with full employment and social progress. The European economy is in its sixth year of recovery, now reaching all EU members. Growth has been accompanied by gradual improvements in labor markets and in the social situation across the EU. We will use this opportunity to go further, to ensure the sustainability of our recovery, to further improve our resilience to future economic shocks, to tackle social challenges, and to maximize the benefits of new opportunities that the new world of work gives rise to. People should be able to seize these new opportunities and to be effectively protected no matter what type of job they are in. This is also the underlying rationale of what we call the European Pillar of Social Rights, which the European Union leaders have solemnly proclaimed last November at the Social Summit for Fair Jobs and Growth in Gothenburg, Sweden. The European Pillar of Social Rights anchors a strong social dimension in the future of the European Union. It reiterates our common values and sets out 20 principles and rights to deliver a positive impact on people's lives in the short and medium term. From the right to fair wages to the right of health care, from lifelong learning, a better work-life balance and gender equality to a minimum income. With the European Pillar of Social Rights, the EU stands up for the rights of its citizens in a fast-changing world in full conformity with social goals of the 2030 Agenda. The pillar will also help ensure that nobody is left behind. It confirms that young people have the right to continued education, apprenticeship, traineeship, or a job offer of good standing within 4 months of becoming unemployed or leaving education. In Europe, millions of young people have benefited from the Youth Guarantee, which is supporting the gradual improvement we see in youth employment. In net terms, there are now 1.5 million fewer young unemployed in the EU compared to 2013. A new initiative under the pillar, the New Start, will help address the challenges of work-life balance faced by working families, while also addressing women's underrepresentation in the labor market and supporting their career progression through modern work-life balance policy. This initiative will contribute to EU objectives of equality between men and women with regard to labor market opportunities and equal treatment at work. The New Start initiative will also further intensify our efforts to combat violence against women. The pillar also confirms that persons with disabilities have the right to income support that ensures they can live in dignity, with access to services that enable them to participate in the labor market and in society, and a work environment adapted to their needs. In addition, disability concerns are mainstreamed into the principles related to education, training, and long life learning, equal opportunities, work-life balance, child care and support to children, long-term care, housing and assistance for the homeless, and access to social services in line with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to which the EU is a party. Furthermore, the EU will continue to mainstream disability issues in actions to combat unemployment and works towards the full participation in society of persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others. With this aim in mind, a new proposal is in the pipeline for European Accessibility Act to ensure accessibility for persons with disabilities to essential goods and services in the single market. All these efforts are part of our proactive and coherent strategy to anchor sustainability in regulation and policy making with a view to ensuring a future-proof society. For example, we need to do better at equipping all our people with the skills and training to compete in open and changing markets. Our education systems need to provide the skills that meet labor market demands. In adult learning, average participation remains stuck around 11%, despite a fast-evolving variety of needs, and the low-qualified adults are only half as likely to participate in learning as others. Soon, even the most basic tasks in our economy will increasingly require a broader set of digital, service, and people-oriented skills. The new skills agenda for Europe offers the framework for our governments, stakeholders, and our citizens to make that shift. Going forward, a second work stream will launch reflection work on developing further the European Union longer-term vision and the focus of sectoral policies after our current policy cycle ending in 2020. This work will help revamp partnership and enable citizens, governments, civil society, and social partners to define and give meaning to a social dimension for Europe that builds on sustainable development and is fit for 21st century realities. In addition, the European Youth Strategy is an ongoing and dynamic process to develop and empower youth issues in all policies in the European Union. Following the Council resolution on a renewed framework for European cooperation in the youth field 2010-2018, the European Union has set up the structured dialogue, a procedure that is unique in the EU and ensures systematic inclusion of young people in the political decision-making. In the second half of 2018, the EU Youth Strategy will be renewed with the objective to be even more cross-sectoral and sustainable. This includes aiming to develop youth goals and pursue the structured dialogue as an outstanding participation instrument for young people in policy making at all levels. Important fields of youth policy are, among others, participation and inclusion, education and learning, and mobility. Mobility programs like Erasmus+ give young people the possibility to get to know other people, countries, and cultures. These experiences provide opportunities for non-formal and informal learning in different contexts and empower young people to participate in society. Therefore, these programs play an important role to help overcome prejudices and in short build a cohesive European society. The EU and its member states remain fully committed to implementing the 2030 Agenda abroad too. For example, the new European Consensus on Development, the EU's new development policy, is framed around the 5 Ps of people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership, and seeks to support the achievement of all 17 Sustainable Development Goals in an integrated manner. It underlines our intention to work more strongly and effectively with all our partners, including by forging new relationships. This includes countries at all stages of development. We will continue to target our assistance to the least developed and conflict-affected countries. And we will also strengthen our partnerships with middle-income countries, including the more advanced developing countries. They will be critical in achieving the 2030 Agenda and for addressing social development and the rising inequalities within countries. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I thank the permanent representative of Bulgaria speaking on behalf of the European Union, and I give the floor to Her Excellency, the permanent representative of Vietnam, speaking on behalf of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Madam, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 10 member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, namely Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos PDR, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and my own country, Vietnam. ASEAN allied itself with the statement delivered by the distinguished representative of Egypt on behalf of G77 and China. Mr. Chair, poverty reduction has always been among high priorities of ASEAN since its inception. As articulated in Article 1 of the ASEAN Charter, poverty alleviation and narrowing the development gap has been identified as one of the 15 purposes of ASEAN. The establishment of ASEAN Community in 2015 and the subsequent adoption of ASEAN Community Vision 2025 signify ASEAN's determination and commitments to better ensure a peaceful and prosperous life for our peoples. Last year, ASEAN commemorated the 50th anniversary, further reaffirming our commitment to realizing a truly people-oriented, people-centered, inclusive, and resilient community in which we strongly believe that poverty reduction plays the major part. According to ESCAP, ASEAN has made great strides in reducing extreme absolute poverty, which dropped from 138 million people in 2000 to 44 million people in 2015, and is on track to be under 25 million people in 2030 if past trends continue. The number of people classified as relatively poor compared to national income halved between 2000 and 2015, from 165 million down to 86 million people. Building upon what had been done, the year 2017 continued to witness ASEAN genuine progress and practical initiatives in poverty reduction that could be summarized in 3 letter I's: innovation, inclusivity, and international cooperation. Mr. Chair, ASEAN is very much aware of the importance of science, technology, and innovation, STI, to the national and regional development, as it has fostered sustainable economic growth, job creation, and people's empowerment. Last November, ASEAN leaders adopted the Declaration on Innovation that lays down the guiding principles to strengthen the policy and institutional environment for harnessing and advancing STI. The declaration set out numerous directions to promote excellence and relevance in public research and encourage stronger links among governments, academia, industry, and society in order to strengthen the impact of STI. ASEAN continues its efforts in building an inclusive community that engages and benefits peoples through the widespread implementations of various programs and frameworks, such as the Regional Framework and Action Plan on implementing the Declaration on Strengthening Social Protection in ASEAN, Mobilization Framework of the ASEAN Decades of Persons with Disabilities, 2011-2020. Action Agenda on Mainstreaming Women's Economic Empowerment in ASEAN, adopted in 2017, work out strategic measures on innovation, trade and inclusive business and human capital development, including addressing the barriers that impede maximizing women's full economic potential, promoting women's participation and skills development, investing in programs which provide enabling environments for women, micro, small, and medium enterprises, and increasing women's representations and leadership in the workforce at the executive and managerial positions. As part of the commitment to youth development, ASEAN leaders adopted the ASEAN Youth Development Index, focusing on 4 domains: education, health and well-being, employment and opportunity, participation, and engagement. This first ever index will serve as useful reference for ASEAN member states in the formulations of responsive and relevant policy and programs to address youth issues and concerns in our respective countries. Under the Work Plan on Promotions and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children 2016-2020, a number of important projects have been approved and undertaken, such as eliminating child marriage, awareness-raising campaign on social impact of climate change on women and children, women, peace and security, regional dialogue and on children bullying and abuse at schools and online. ASEAN is now in the process of developing a regional plan of action on implementing the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on Aging, empowering older persons in ASEAN. ASEAN adopted the Inclusive Business Framework, which institutionalizes and mainstreams inclusive business into ASEAN economic community building efforts, particularly on medium, micro, small enterprises development through market-driven and innovative solutions to poverty reduction, economic empowerment, and social impact to millions of peoples in ASEAN. Mr. Chair, ASEAN attaches great importance to cooperation with external partners, as we believe that international partnerships and cooperation in poverty alleviation help accelerate progress and development on the basis of mutual interests and benefits. With the recognition of complementarities between the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, ASEAN and UN have been working closely to find ways and means to align these two mutually reinforcing agendas. Poverty eradication, together with resilience, infrastructure, sustainable consumption and production, and sustainable management of natural resources, have been identified as 5 priorities in leveraging the complementarities. The synergies in the implementations of these 2 agendas will surely help intensify national, regional, and global efforts towards eradicating all forms of poverty by 2030 and uplifting the living standards of peoples. In 2017, the Statement on Cooperation in Poverty Alleviation was adopted by leaders of East Asia Summit comprising of ASEAN member states, Australia, China, India, Japan, Republic of Korea, New Zealand, Russia, and the United States. This will serve as a framework to increase mutual support and assistance, strengthen the means of implementation, and promote the global partnerships for sustainable development. Mr. Chair, poverty eradication is high on ASEAN community building agenda. Poverty, with its multidimensional nature, requires the holistic and integrated approach to address its root causes and impact on the lives of the people. We reaffirm our commitment to implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and ending poverty and hunger in all their forms everywhere. In conclusion, we would like to express our appreciation and support for the Commission on Social Development as the platform for sharing experiences and innovative ideas. We wish our sessions very fruitful outcomes. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the permanent representative of Vietnam speaking on behalf of ASEAN, and I give the floor to His Excellency, the permanent representative of Equatorial Guinea, speaking on behalf of the group of African states. So you have the floor.
Señor Presidente, tengo el honor.
Chair, I have the honour of making this statement on behalf of the African Group. Allow me to begin by congratulating you on behalf of the African Group for the very able way in which you have been leading and preparing the work of the 56th session of the Commission on Social Development. We are sure that our discussions at this 56th session will lead to a successful outcome under your leadership. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by the delegation of Egypt on behalf of the G77 and China. The African Group thanks the Secretary-General for his report related to this agenda item, and we have taken note of the recommendations contained therein. Chair, poverty is at the root of all ills. It leads to illness and disease, to under- and malnutrition, to lackluster economic growth, to human trafficking, and to drug-taking inter alia. It is a threat to success and prosperity. Eradicating poverty is the overarching purpose of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It is the core, interdependent and mutually reinforcing pillar of the Copenhagen Declaration. Despite the multiple commitments and pledges at the international level to eradicate poverty, the African Group remains deeply concerned that despite the 1.1 billion people who have escaped from extreme poverty, thus far, the pace of poverty reduction in sub-Saharan Africa is still very slow. 390.2 million Africans continue to live in extreme poverty. Chair, distinguished delegates, those who live in poverty experience multiple problems and deprivations. They experience restrictions on their opportunities and they suffer social exclusion. Governments and the international community must decide to implement specific strategies that are time-bound with specific deadlines to resolve the challenges inherent in achieving social development and eradicating absolute poverty. Microphone, please, for the speaker. Microphone, please, for Equatorial Guinea. Microphone, please, for the representative of Equatorial Guinea. The interpreter apologizes, but we have no microphone for Equatorial Guinea. Poverty is a particular problem for countries affected by conflict and instability. It continues to be stubbornly present in least developed countries in Africa, where progress towards economic growth is much slower and where major obstacles still need to be overcome. Globally, the number of persons suffering from chronic malnutrition increased in 2016. Said increase can be attributed in part to famine and to the deterioration in food security in those areas affected by climate change, conflict, and atypical violence. Moreover, the economic slowdown, particularly in those African countries whose economies depend on commodities, has reduced fiscal income and export revenues, which in turn has had an adverse impact on access to food for the poorest in society. Your Excellencies, war and civil unrest continue to put the squeeze on African economies and thus fuel extreme poverty across the continent. The most significant achievement in terms of Africa's own commitment to reverse the patterns of conflict and insecurity that prevail in the region has been the adoption of the Protocol on Peace and Security of the African Union, dated 2002. Said protocol serves as a mechanism to prevent, manage and resolve conflict. It provides a robust and proactive framework for promoting peace and security in Africa and for putting into action the relevant provisions of the Constitutive Act of the African Union. In point of fact, silencing the guns has become a priority for peace and security of the African Union. The African Union has crafted a convincing vision for the future in its Agenda 2063, which maps out the path towards an integrated, prosperous and peaceful Africa, one that is people-led and focused, an Africa that will be an agent of change on the global stage, where development is people-led, with a particular focus on harnessing the potential of women and youth. Chair, Excellencies, making headway in eradicating poverty means first and foremost addressing inequality in all its forms and dimensions. Inequality between countries has increased in many nations, thus slowing or bringing to a full stop the pace of poverty reduction. Inequality deprives low-income households of the ability to stay healthy and to accumulate financial and human capital. This in turn reduces labour output and thus reduces social mobility. When a large swathe of any given population is trapped in a cycle of poverty, consumption and aggregate demand also fall off and economic growth slows down. This makes it difficult to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty. We all know that to eradicate poverty and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we require full employment and decent work for all. In Africa, the outlook for job creation continues to be pessimistic. Young people, who make up the majority of our societies, are particularly impacted. Unemployment for young people stands at higher levels than the average unemployment rate for the overall population. Large numbers of young people do not have jobs, nor education, nor relevant skills. The majority therefore work in vulnerable jobs in the informal sector with low salaries, with poor working conditions and without social protection. The combination of all of these elements often leads young people to turn to irregular migration both within and beyond Africa. Informal work is often the only option available to them in order to eke out a living. The provision of quality, fair and inclusive education for all is vital if we're to eradicate poverty in all its forms and guises. Addressing the educational needs of children who are not in school, and addressing marked regional differences and differences within a given country will have huge implications for our poverty eradication efforts. In this respect, the African Union Assembly in January 2017 declared the African Decade for Technical, Professional and Entrepreneurial Education and for Youth Employment, and established the African Youth Fund with an allocation of at least 1% of the programme budget of the African Union Commission. The African Union Commission is working closely with our partners in order to develop a detailed action plan for the decade, and the African Union Commission will also establish a continent-wide dialogue platform on development capacity in Africa. Distinguished delegates, poverty and inequality are intrinsically intertwined. The adoption of the post-2015 development agenda gave us an action plan for people, planet and prosperity, which sets the lofty goal of succeeding in putting an end to poverty and hunger in all corners of the world by 2030. Governments are convinced that it is necessary to tackle inequalities within and between countries in order to forge fair and inclusive societies and to usher in a peaceful global order. The 2030 Development Agenda underscores the usefulness of implementing poverty reduction strategies that include an employment component that is focused on employment for all, including the most vulnerable in society. Part of the way this can be achieved is through providing tertiary education to all children, thus breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty within families and closing the income inequality gap within communities. In Africa, school enrollment rates for children are on the rise. Crucial to all of our endeavours is the quality of our educational outcomes. Equally important is addressing the lack of educational and learning programmes and possibilities, and lack of educational infrastructure to meet the needs of persons with disabilities. International partnership and support is necessary if we are to move towards an inclusive education and learning system which satisfy the development needs of African nations. We also need similar international support and partnership to strengthen vocational, tertiary and research institutions across Africa. Harnessing the demographic dividend of Africa through investment is key if we are to achieve the aspirations spelled out in the 2030 Development Agenda. This will require stepped-up levels of cooperation and support for our developing societies and for the United Nations relevant funds and programmes. We will need such support from the private sector and from civil society as well as from the United Nations if we are to position Africa to take advantage of the potential of its young people through development and implementation of robust and successful policies in the fields of education and health, thus fostering a favourable macroeconomic environment for development. Among the general strategies for eradicating and tackling poverty in all its aspects are sustainable solutions to address the impact of irregular migration in which African youths are caught up. And we need to do this again through international cooperation, which will serve inter alia to resolve the all too often violation of human rights of African migrants that we see, of resolving said phenomenon in a comprehensive and integrated way. The protection and promotion of economic and social rights of migrants, irrespective of their migration status, through the extension of social security coverage, particularly in countries of destination, is a critical step that must be taken to deliver social development. Given the positive contributions that they make to economic development and to eradication of poverty, the Global Compact for Migration that we aim to adopt this year should include clear commitments and time-bound commitments to take advantage of the abilities of migrants either in their country of origin or destination, addressing inter alia financial, administrative and legal issues. Chair, improving health and improving the well-being of all persons is one of the core objectives of the 2030 Agenda. In Africa, countries have set as a priority reducing maternal and child mortality. In 2009, the leaders of the African Union committed to upholding high standards of maternal, child and nursing baby health as part of the Agenda for Africa, and they adopted an accelerated maternal mortality reduction in Africa campaign. Several countries in Africa have also boosted support for basic family income, as well as support for those who live in poverty, persons with disabilities, HIV and AIDS orphans, older persons and other marginalised persons to increase the basic economic resources that are vital for achieving the basic prerequisites for health, such as shelter and nutrition. Chair, distinguished delegates, Africa is convinced that industrialisation is the best way towards job creation, economic growth and the structural transformation of its economy. Africa continues to face major challenges in the field of industrialization, given that it depends chiefly on natural resources and on agriculture. The lack of infrastructure, the impact of climate change on Africa, the lack of access to markets, and the meager levels of technology transfer when it comes to diversifying products continue to be the major hurdle to growth in this sector. The states of Africa have agreed to develop and roll out industrial policies that will attach priority to maximizing the use of local capacity and local productive outputs and inputs. We're committed to adding value and to the local processing of the abundant natural resources of our countries. We're also committed to developing small-scale natural resource programs and to developing agro-industries, including in the informal sector, as well as addressing and improving intermediate goods industries and the capital industry. Given their interlinkages with other sectors of the economy, these are all potential paths for job creation. Chair, we are paying great attention to NIPAD as an initiative when it comes to social and economic development in Africa. Africa will continue to be committed to and participate in social development efforts with priority given to national development policies and plans. The African Group requests our partners to redouble efforts for the full implementation of this important initiative in NEPAD and their support for the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, a financial mechanism for the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. The African Group hopes that we will have a successful 56th session with a useful outcome that will contribute to achieving the overall purpose and goal of eradicating poverty for one and for all. Many thanks for your kind attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Equatorial Guinea speaking on behalf of the group of African states. Just to ensure no misunderstandings, the official record of this meeting will reflect that the statement was delivered by the distinguished delegate of Equatorial Guinea on behalf of the African Group. I say this because for several minutes at the beginning, the sign in front said African Union, so just to avoid any subsequent misunderstandings. Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica, Her Excellency, the Vice President, who will speak first on behalf of the group of Friends of Older Persons and then in her national capacity. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the pleasure to speak on behalf of the following members of the group of Friends of Older Persons at the United Nations in New York: Brazil, Chile, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Indonesia, Kenya, Malaysia, Mexico, Panama, Peru, Qatar, Slovenia, South Africa, Trinidad and Tobago, Uruguay, and my own country, Costa Rica. At the outset, allowed me to congratulate you, Mr. Chair, as well as the other members of the Bureau for the election to lead the works in the current session of the Commission. We hope it will be a very successful and productive one. We would also like to express our appreciation to the Secretary General for the preparation of the report, third review, and appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action agent contained in the document. Mr. Chair, the increase in the number of older persons globally and the growing trend of aging societies all over the world represent a significant change to the democratic structures and our societies and imposes a series of new challenges to development in all and its three dimensions. These demographic trends present both a significant opportunity and a change. The opportunity to benefit from the many contributions of older persons to make the society, the change to design and implement policies that promote social inclusion, intergenerational solidarity, and the full and effective enjoyment, promotion, and protection of the human rights and dignity of older persons. The number of older persons is projected to reach 1.4 billion by 2030, and the increase that will be the greatest in the most rapid in the developing world, and projects indicates that by 2030, older persons will outnumber young as well as children under 10 globally. Furthermore, those projections indicate that by 2050, they will roughly equal the number of children globally. This reality emphasizes the urgent need to recognize that greater and urgent attention needs to be paid to specific challenges affecting older persons, including in the field of social development and their social inclusion and integration. In light of this theme, the current session's title, Strategies to the Eradication of Poverty to Achieve Sustainable Development for All, it is necessary also to highlight that older persons in all regions can be vulnerable to poverty, and we must renew our efforts to achieve an income security and protection, social security, and poverty prevention for older people. Mr. Chair, it is enabled to older people that make a significant contribution to the social, economic, and sustainable development of the societies if adequate guarantees are in full place, and if their social integration and full participation in all aspects of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural life are promoted. In that sense, it is imperative to fully empower older persons to enable to be efficiently make the contribution become not only recipients of special care and social protection, but also active agents and benefits of the change. In that regard, it is fundamental to mainstream aging as well as issues of relevance to older persons into development policies at all levels in order to reap the potential benefits in the active participation and contribution of the growing number of older persons globally. In that context, designing and implementing policies and programs as well as devising adequate legal frames that allow the full society inclusion of older persons as well as their participation in social, economic, cultural, civil, and political life without restraints and free from all forms of discrimination and violence will lead to ensure their dignity, empowerment, and their ability to fully and effectively enjoy their human rights and fundamental freedoms, actively participation in their societies, and contributing to development. This is the key to achieve success in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its Sustainable Development Goals in order to leave no one behind, and the opportunity to reaffirm the commitment reflected in the political declaration adopted in Madrid in 2002 to develop the opportunities and changes of population aging in the 21st century and to promote and development of a society for all ages. Mr. Chair, with regrets for the third review of the Presidential Cycle of Madrid International Plan of Action, we take note that process has been highlighted several common changes across region from various perspectives of democratic transition, cultural norms, and level of economic development, such as health and well-being in order of older person, and the improve and related to health and care service, and the expansion, improvement, and sustainable for all social protection systems in order to income support measures. However, we note with concern that facts that the major contracts of the further implementation for the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging remains the same as those identified during the second review as the pressure in 2012. Lack of human and financial resources, lack of political will, and lack of data in evidence-based in policy making, and the hence recognition of the need for policy action aging. In this regard, we call upon all member states and the international community to strengthen the further implementation of Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging in order to achieve its goals, to seize the instrument as a channel for inclusion of older persons in all age inclusive implementation for the 2030 Agenda and the attainment to the Sustainable Development Goals, including throughout an integrate and manufacture approach in improving the well-being and the enjoyment of the rights and dignity of older persons. To conclude, Mr. Chair, the group of friends highlight the importance of having rights-based perspective on aging in the design or implementation of policy and programs related to the social dimension of sustainable development. The right-based perspective must be found at its place and in the general policy approach of every state to assure inclusive social development. We invite all relevant actors to advance decidedly on including the promotion in this perspective at different levels. It is moreover important to indicate that all through the implementation of the Madrid International Plan of Action may have positive implementations for enjoying of some human rights by older persons that they will address, mainly for the development perspective in that is they're not only designed to comprehensively address exciting protection gaps, therefore it's not sufficient to ensure the full enjoyment of their human rights by older persons. Furthermore, the progress, its implementation is uneven and gaps between policy and practice remain. Regardless of the fact, we believe that sustainable and adequate social and economic policies for older persons can be achieved throughout our shared efforts. The international community must work together to ensure the well-being of older persons while addressing issues related to their social integration and fostering international partnerships and solidarity in order to achieve the full and effective social development of older persons with dignity and rights, leaving no one behind. Thank you, and now I will deliver my national statement in Spanish. Thank you very much. Señor Presidente.
Chair, ladies and gentlemen, today represents the last time that I will address you in my capacity as the Vice President of Costa Rica. For that reason, I'd like to share with you some thoughts and reflections on what my first-hand experience of taking part in this forum has meant to me. Here, the efforts that have characterized my life and my struggle for human rights have found inspiration, clairvoyance, and like-minded partners. But for all that, we have too often failed to go as far as we might, and on occasion our progress has been a little slow. When I think of all that needs to be done and all that we must tackle in a world which poses such enormous challenges to us, challenges which are in no way as great as those faced by the millions of individuals who scrabble merely to make a living or to survive day in and day out, I feel that we must accelerate and commit to doing a little more every day and to doing a little better every day. Chair, it is to all of those persons whom, as states, we are bound by a moral duty, that we bear a responsibility to restore their human dignity, representing them, being their voice, serving to carve out opportunities for a better life for them. And we cannot let them down. We must do our best for them. According to the UNDP report of 2016, human development pays particular attention to the wealth of human lives and not to the wealth of economies. This all is a matter of creating opportunity and capacity, and of expanding the freedoms and rights of persons so that they can take control of their own lives and destinies. And I wonder to myself, is this truly where we are headed as things currently stand? As representatives of the world's nations, are we indeed doing all we ought, and at the appropriate pace, to achieve the human development of our peoples? This forum has served as an opportunity for me to engage in soul-searching and introspection, and I wanted to encourage that same exercise of reflection in all of you, to reflect on what we inspire to build for our countries, and to compare that with what we're actually doing in reality. For example, if we consider that in today's world more than 7 billion people call the planet home, and that during the last 3 decades, globalization has led to huge shifts in our societies, then we are in a position to understand the need to pursue concrete, urgent action, human-centered action, an action that is genuinely committed to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals under the 2030 Agenda. Chair, as far as Costa Rica is concerned, I can, in good conscience and understanding, share with you all that we have embraced this commitment as the government that I represent that took office some 4 years ago, and our achievements are many. As the coordinator of the social sector in Costa Rica, I would like to point to just a few of said successes. We have created a robust and successful plan to tackle poverty, and, inter alia, we have included therein a multidimensional poverty index, thanks to which we have managed to achieve levels of said poverty in a significant and sustained way. We have boosted levels of investment in education as well as in technology, and we have established a national strategy to bridge the digital divide called CR Digital. And as part of that, a program entitled Connected Homes to bring the internet to the furthest corners of our country so that the World Wide Web can bring prosperity and opportunity to all. We have made headway in delivering on the human rights of the most vulnerable in society, such as women, persons with disabilities, LGBTI individuals, the indigenous and Afro-descendants. And this is something of which I feel proud. But there is still a lot to be done despite those success stories. Nonetheless, I can say, as I prepare to leave office, that my country today is a little fairer, a little more egalitarian and inclusive. We also have a national Sustainable Development Goal that is fully aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals in the 2030 Agenda. We have signed a national agreement bringing together all sectors of Costa Rican society to make headway towards said Sustainable Development Goals, and this is a state policy which is to be implemented irrespective of the political stripe of the government in office. Chair, I come from a small, middle-income country that is investing all that it can in its people because we understand that all of us, every man and woman of Costa Rica, is the most precious asset that my country has. And this, when all is said and done, is what human development is about, the well-being of people, investing in them and their futures on an urgent basis, swiftly, justly, setting aside political pettiness and point scoring. This is the best gift that we can give to our world, the world that will be inherited by future generations. Chair, the architecture of human development is different to that of economic growth. It is more sensitive, more fragile, and more diverse. It is not an abstract matter of mathematics, of addition and subtraction. It requires an ethical and moral vision from states, where the priority at all times is people, ahead of power games or power grabs, where persistence guides and shapes our efforts, and where, despite the limitations and restrictions that universalization of any human design imposes, we genuinely work to forge societies in which each and every one of us has a space of dignity and respect and harmony, where we are free to dare to believe that we can follow our dreams and find our happiness, irrespective of who we are and where we live. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Costa Rica who concluded the group statements and indeed opened the national statements. I would like now to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru, His Excellency, the Minister of Development and Social Inclusion. You have the floor, sir.
Señor Presidente.
Chair, I'd like to begin by bidding you a good morning and to say just how delighted my delegation is to see you presiding over the work of the 56th session of the Commission of Social Development of the United Nations. I would like to extend a similar greeting to all the members of the Executive Board and express my gratitude for the report that has been submitted to us today. It is an honour for me to participate as the representative of Peru in this key meeting. I would like to begin my statement by sharing with you a little of my own background. I was born in a rural area of the Amazon region of my country, the Amazon, of course, being the principal source of the world's biodiversity. My father farmed land alongside the banks of the Amazon, and my mother was a teacher in the community school. Thanks to their vision and effort, and thanks to my own personal determination, I had access to a raft of opportunities that have led me to where I am today in this office that I see as an honour and to whose duties I am dedicated. My story is unusual for my country, a country in which more than 6 million people live in poverty, and many more live in a position of vulnerability. Over the last 15 years, Peru has made significant progress. The combination of economic growth, robust macroeconomic policies, and effective social policies have seen poverty in Peru fall from 54.8% in 2004 to 20.7% in 2016. In this high middle income country, progress jostles with major challenges which require immediate and ongoing attention. Peru is a country of great diversity and inequality at the territorial, ethnic and gender levels, and these factors still far too often serve to determine the path of life that will be followed by an individual. Some facts. 43.6% of children between 6 and 36 months are anemic. 1.2 million people live in extreme poverty. Wealth is unevenly spread. 1,028 of the 1,874 districts of Peru have levels of poverty higher than 40%. In 387 of said districts, less than 50% of homes have running water and sanitation and plumbing. The rural areas of the high Andes and of the Amazon, and in particular indigenous and native communities, are conspicuous by their absence when we take stock of the benefits of development. They are invisible. Peru is very vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The ravages of the El Niño climate phenomenon in 2015 left 197,000 persons as direct victims or injured and more than 1 million further affected. Despite the efforts to respond to their needs, a large number of those families so affected have seen their pre-existing poverty worsen or have slid back into the clutches of poverty. Faced with these challenges, Peru is committed to forging sustainable prosperity in which nobody will be left behind. And this is a goal we have set for ourselves and one that has been made clear by President Kuczynski in various international fora. The social agenda of Peru, as enshrined in the National Development Policy and Social Inclusion Policy, is fully aligned with the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. We have set ourselves very ambitious goals and targets for the 5-year period 2016 to 2021. 1. Eradicating extreme poverty and reducing poverty to 15%. Second, ensuring that all homes and households have access to a comprehensive package of services including water, sanitation, electricity and telecommunications. 3. Guaranteeing early childhood development with a particular focus on providing adequate nutrition in the early years. And 4th, improving access to development opportunities for the native communities in the Amazon region. To achieve all of the aforementioned, we have undertaken a raft of actions which are focused on the dignity of individuals and target in particular vulnerable groups. We have addressed in a holistic and multidimensional way the issue of poverty. Some tangible examples of same include our steps to strengthen the link between cash transfer schemes, financial inclusion and productive outputs in rural areas. We have brought the state closer to the native communities in the Amazon region through mobile hubs, which deliver essential public services to the most remote regions of the country. To tackle urban pockets of poverty, we have rolled out a package of measures to address security, care services, education and training for young people, and access to labour markets. All authorities at every level of the country have committed to achieving and set goals to prevent and reduce levels of anemia in the first 1,000 days of life. We are currently crafting a reactive social protection strategy to reduce the risks of poor and vulnerable households falling further into poverty or sinking back into same, thus losing hard-won prosperity gains. Particularly for those poor and vulnerable homes that are faced with disasters. We are determined to do all that we can in order to ensure that we mobilize resources in order to ensure that we can find and implement effective solutions. We want everyone to have a voice in development. The opportunities and challenges before my country are considerable. To achieve our goals, state action alone will not suffice. It is essential that we are joined by other stakeholders, in particular the international community and the private sector. I think it worth underscoring the need to acknowledge that middle-income countries such as Peru deserve unique and special treatment and support so that when 2030 rolls around, we will have cause to celebrate that all people, with no one left behind, are part of sustainable development prosperity and peace. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Peru, and I give the floor to His Excellency, the Minister of Social Action of Paraguay. You have the floor, sir.
Muy buenos días.
A very good morning, or rather good afternoon, Chair. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate you personally and all the members of the Bureau upon your election and to wish you all every success in the discharge of your duties. The Republic of Paraguay aligns itself with the statement delivered by Egypt on behalf of the G77 and China. Chair, it is abundantly clear that the eradication of poverty constitutes one of the main goals and purposes of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And, let it be made clear, this is one of the major challenges for Paraguay as well. The challenge of eradicating poverty compels us to be creative and innovative in the crafting and rollout of policies and strategies to achieve said stated goal. Thus, I would like to share with you that in Paraguay we have made significant headway and that to date we have indicators that testify to said efforts, including the continuous reduction in poverty indices, in particular when it comes to extreme poverty. Levels of extreme poverty have fallen from the 7.3% recorded in 2012 to 5.73% in 2016. Paraguay is also making a committed investment in social investment, where we are seeing an upward trend. I would highlight in particular the ongoing increase in the coverage provided by our cash transfer programs under the Tecopora program, which saw an 84% increase in 2017 when compared with 2013. I would also point to our food allowances for older persons living in poverty, which to date covers the needs of 95.5% of older persons living in poverty. Moreover, we have implemented innovative alternatives to ensure a structured and sustainable escape from poverty, thanks to the Tenondera program, which is focused on income generation for families in order to make them self-sufficient. In Paraguay, we have also rolled out the Tecoja program, which is a program of social development and support for urban or suburban centers and settlements. The program seeks to improve the living standards of families living in poverty or who are vulnerable to poverty by means of improving their habitat and their accommodation and through facilitating access to basic public services on an environmentally friendly basis. Here, the government of Paraguay has embarked upon a robust program of house building affordable housing and social welfare housing that prioritizes low-income families. Under the current government, we have seen a 600% increase in the number of such low-income and social welfare housing completed and handed over. These figures indicate that we have been able to lift out of poverty thousands of families. The challenge ahead of us is not just to continue on this front, but also to take steps in order to ensure that those who have escaped poverty do not slip back into that same trap. Within the Secretariat of Social Action, the institution that I head up, and which plays a central role in Paraguay's efforts to eradicate poverty, over the last few years, not just have we increased the coverage provided by our main social programs, but we have also developed new initiatives that go alongside our poverty reduction programs, specifically to address this issue of preventing a slide back into the poverty trap. An example of same would be efforts taken to address the financial inclusion of persons living in poverty or vulnerable to poverty through innovations in the cash transfer program, which is part of our largest social protection program, Tecopora. Currently, 70% of the cash transfers under the Tecopora program are made digitally, with particular attention paid to providing digital coverage in the most remote areas of the country which do not enjoy easy access to banks or to other financial institutions. A symbolic example of same is that of the indigenous communities living along the banks of the river, whose homes are far-flung from the capital and from other major urban centres. Their cash transfers and cash transactions are made via their mobile phones, digitally in other words. I would also, on this particular point, like to draw your attention to the fact that the level of indigenous community coverage of the Tekopora programme has shot up from 3% to 95% in just 4 short years. With the inclusion of these services, such as digital cash transfer, within the Tekopora programme, the Secretariat of Social Action has managed to be more effective and efficient in the provision of cash transfer programmes, and thus we have contributed more to the empowerment of those families that benefit under said scheme. A further innovation implemented under the Tekopora programme is that of micro-social security, which includes a life insurance policy and the coverage of funeral costs in the event of the death of the head of the household, and will also cover a further 3 members of a given household. The micro-social security programme is free for participating families and is a mechanism intended to ward off the adverse effects of twists of fate on the finances of poor families, because such unexpected events could very well serve to exacerbate their poverty. Chair, to conclude, I would like to reiterate my country's commitment to complying with international goals when it comes to poverty eradication, and our commitment to reducing inequality and to boosting social inclusion. We would like to underscore the important role that the Commission for Social Development plays in contributing to analysing comprehensive strategies and the public policies that are the vehicles for achieving said lofty goals. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Paraguay, and I give the floor to His Excellency, the Minister of Labour, Solidarity and Social Welfare of Portugal. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Muito obrigado.
Thank you. Mr. President, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor that I address all the participants of this session of the Commission for Social Development. Portugal has for a long time been actively contributing to the work which has been developed here. But it is the first time that a Portuguese minister participates in this commission, of which Portugal became a member in 2016. I start my intervention by emphasizing that the statement presented by the representative of Bulgaria on behalf of the European Union is fully subscribed to by Portugal. As mentioned in the report of the Secretary General on the priority theme of this commission, which I welcome, eradication of poverty is a prominent global and overarching goal of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The 2030 Agenda requires governments to establish an enhanced framework of accountability for the pursuit and achievement of the objectives at the national, regional, and global levels. The leading motto of the 2030 Agenda 2030, "No one is left behind," calls for a structured approach and shared responsibilities. It is not just about what governments can do to achieve the goals. It is about what we can do individually and collectively. Poverty eradication must be the major ambition of our society and become a priority for any economy that aspires to be competitive and sustainable. Within this ambition, I highlight a particular one, the need to tackle child poverty, essential to break the cycle of exclusion and inequality. Poverty is a multidimensional and distinct reality in different parts of the world. Although we find very different starting points around the globe, poverty eradication requires, in the medium and long term, strategic, integrated, and coherent measures covering all political and territorial dimensions and all population groups. Emphasizing that my intervention is presented from the perspective of a country that has overcome endemic poverty, but still maintains pockets of poverty and social exclusion, I underline the need to intervene in three main areas. Firstly, the creation of a comprehensive education system to counteract school dropout and failure, guaranteeing to all, in particular children, the right to education, thus contributing to interrupt the intergenerational transmission of poverty. Secondly, the creation of a more inclusive and sustainable labor market for all. It is essential to reduce the share of workers with low levels of income, weak employment relations, and low social protection. There is also an urgent need to effectively support the unemployed in re-entering the labor market, in particular the very long-term unemployed who face the erosion of skills and additional obstacles in the integration process. Thirdly, the creation of a more effective and efficient social protection system capable of adjusting to changes of a social reality. In this context, particular attention should be paid to families with young children, older persons, and social groups that are marginalized and discriminated against in the access to decent work. It is essential to ensure a more balanced distribution of income, both through social transfers and taxes. These priorities have a common fundamental concern: the sustainability of development. By creating or valuing the new jobs in the green economy and in the circular economy, by valuing citizens' skills and ensuring a balanced use of public resources, particularly those of social protection systems. In July last year, Portugal presented its national report on the implementation of the Agenda 2030 at the high-level political forum on sustainable development, reporting on the ongoing measures to address structural changes, poverty, and exclusion. In the long period of crisis that recently affected Portugal, we witnessed an increase in poverty in its different forms. The government, which I now represent, established a priority to reverse this trend. How? By reinforcing integrated policy measures that combine the recovery of disposable income of families with incentives to promote labor and market entrance of permanence. One example of these measures is the social insertion income, aimed at the protection of individuals and families who are in a situation of extreme poverty. It is composed of a cash transfer component that aims to ensure the satisfaction of basic needs and an insertion program that supports progressive social labor and community integration of its beneficiaries. I would like to highlight the update of the national minimum wage, which has contributed to increase families' incomes and guarantee workers a progressive increase of the value of their work, thus contributing to an effective reduction of inequalities. With regard to older persons, our main objective is to ensure an adequate level of income in old age, combined with increased opportunities and incentives for prolonging work life. Review concerning the second theme of this debate, because I don't have much more time available, I can only say that I would just underline that the United Nations programs and plans followed by the Commission for Social Development are vital instruments for development follow-up of policies established by our countries in favor of young people, older persons, families, children, and people with disabilities. Certainly all these groups are a particular focus to which women should be given focus. One final word: to wish you all a good working week. I hope that the debate over the following days will constitute an occasion to gain awareness of our weaknesses and also an opportunity to share practices and experiences. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Portugal, and I give the floor to Her Excellency the Minister of Social Solidarity of Egypt. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. At the outset, I am honored to participate in this session to talk about the achievements of Egypt in this regard. Egypt has put in place a national strategy for sustainable development, Vision 2030, to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, notably Goal 1, poverty eradication. Since 2014, the Egyptian government has put in place a program to address priority issues as follows. Implementing a set of economic reforms to address structural problems confronting the Egyptian economy for years and exacerbated by economic slowdown following the revolutions of January 2011 and June 2013. These reforms were based on national priorities and in cooperation with the IMF and other international organizations. We also put in place a set of social policies to protect the most vulnerable, notably women and youth. These policies are integrated and address the phenomena of multidimensional poverty and not only income poverty. First, we targeted women and persons with disabilities and school children. We implemented a program that provides unconditional cash assistance to the elderly, persons with disabilities to meet their basic needs. This program is called Dignity. We also targeted women and children through a program of cash assistance on the condition of children staying in school. It also provides health services. This program reached 2.25 million families, including 10 million Egyptian citizens. It provided cash transfers of more than $1 billion, and 86% were allocated to provinces of low income. The state also expanded social housing. We built more than 8,000 residential units, subsidized partially by the state and allocated for low-income youth. We also addressed slums where hundreds of thousands of citizens resided. We put in place a plan to replace slums with other modern facilities to be leased for a symbolic fee for eligible households. We also enacted the first law for universal health insurance to be implemented gradually all over Egypt. We also put in place a set of legislation to empower Egyptian women. The representation of women in our parliament has reached 90 women out of 600 members of parliament. We have implemented a quota for women. We have also increased the percentage of female ministers to 6%. And a woman was appointed for the first time in the position of a governor. We have also imposed heavier sentences for violence against women and harassment. Egypt was one of the first countries to ratify the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. However, this convention was only translated into legislation in 2017. We have enacted the first law to protect the rights of persons with disabilities. We have also provided monthly cash assistance to more than 1 million persons with disabilities. We have also provided them with priority in education, training, and work opportunities. Food assistance is one of the most important components of Egyptian social safety nets. The Egyptian government allocated a great share of our budget for this purpose. We have provided food assistance to more than 75 million Egyptian citizens. We have also, through the central bank, allocated more than $10 billion to achieve financial inclusion through providing financing to micro and small enterprises. And we have also provided a variety of financial services through our technological infrastructure. We have also modernized our infrastructure when it comes to energy, water, sanitation, in order to achieve a set of objectives, in order to improve the living standards of citizens and provide them with better work opportunities. We have also provided an infrastructure in order to attract private, regional, and international investments. Chairman, Egypt presides over the Executive Bureau of the Council of Arab Ministers of Social Affairs, we have adopted the first Arab strategy for the elderly and a regional plan for the rights of persons with disabilities. Arab ministers held the first conference on putting in place regional plans to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. This conference was attended by relevant UN entities, funds, and programs, and the Ministerial Council issued the first regional report on multidimensional poverty in cooperation with UNDP and the University of Oxford. We believe that poverty eradication is an achievable goal in Egypt if the government, the private sector, and civil society join forces, and if there is security, stability, and peace, so that our development efforts can bear fruit. I wish you success in your deliberations, and I believe that everyone will work together, and we truly take inspiration in this partnership, and we call on you to ensure the participation of the private sector, civil society, women, and youth. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Egypt. I give the floor to Her Excellency, the Minister for Gender, Children and Social Protection of Ghana. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish you all a happy new year. It is an honor for me to address the 56th session of this commission and to make this presentation on behalf of our President, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, and the people of Ghana. Mr. Chairman, the people of Ghana have a dream and a vision to achieve economic freedom and to develop a Ghana beyond aid. To make this vision a reality, Ghana has made appreciable strides towards poverty reduction, especially amongst the extreme poor, by lowering its incidence from 18.2% in 2002-2003 to 8.4% in 2013-2014, Ghana Living Standard Survey. This makes us one of the few countries to achieve the 2015 MDG target of halving poverty. It is important to note that Ghana's continued economic growth performance over the last 2 decades, coupled with social interventions for its poor and vulnerable populations, contributed to this significant decline in poverty. However, there remains regional disparities and inequalities among socio-economic groupings which must be addressed. Also, there are gaps between the theory, the goals, the expectations, and the practice and reality to ensure that we leave nobody behind or out. Mr. Chairman, I want to share a story of a distress call I received from a young girl of 23 years who had not eaten for 3 days but had been living on water. Out of desperation, she called me because her father is dead, although she's completed tertiary education and she has no job, and the mother barely ekes out a living selling chewing sticks. Her story is Ghana's story of the many vulnerable people of 2.2 million extreme poor, and her story is an indicator that we must transform lives at a more accelerated pace. No poor person can wait for as long as there is a girl or a boy or a man or a woman hungry and poor. Then, Mr. Chairman, 2030 agenda seems too far from our vulnerable people. And that is why Ghana, like many countries, has adopted social protection as a key mechanism for poverty reduction and eradication. The 4th Republican Constitution of Ghana demonstrates our seriousness of purpose, and in articles which include our dealing with equality and freedom from discrimination, to addressing gender, ethnic, and occupational imbalances, the framework for decent work, social insurance, health and safety, and welfare in employment, the development of creative potentials and contributory schemes for economic security are all embedded in our Constitution. We have equal educational opportunities and maternity benefits. And also, our Parliament is required to enact laws that are necessary to ensure that every child has the right to the same measure of special care, assistance, and maintenance as is necessary for its development. But, Mr. Chairman, what do all these laws and policies mean to very rural people in deprived communities who can barely read in their own language, let alone in English? Mr. Chairman, because of this, Ghana has developed a national social protection policy that provides a comprehensive framework for effective delivery of our social protection interventions. And we must better address all the issues of poverty. We are developing a social protection bill that will provide legislative backing to the policy to ensure its sustainability in terms of funding and effective implementation. These legislative instruments, when passed, must also be enforced. The gap between the instruments and the enforcement is another issue that affects poverty. And it is our unique opportunity to change lives and leave them out of poverty and provide hand-ups and not handouts to transform the very lives that we wish to see in terms of their well-being. Mr. Chairman, living in fear of hunger and poverty is a tragedy for our vulnerable in our society. And so strategies for eradicating poverty to achieve sustainable development for all will include meaningful targeting, intergenerational solutions, and effective coordination of social protection programs. We have a national household registry working on a database on extreme poor, and it's essentially the primary mechanism for selection of beneficiary households for all social protection interventions in Ghana, focusing primarily on the aged over 65 years, orphans and vulnerable children, persons with disability, and pregnant women with children under 1 year. The ministry has also established a single-window citizen service to improve case management and strengthen referral systems for social services. We dub it the Helpline of Hope, the voice of the voiceless, to disseminate relevant information to people who believe that giving a child out for marriage is an honor, when they should understand that it is a crime and the theft of the destiny of the girl child. And so the call center is the first of its kind, and we are going to provide different types of communication using different communication technology to look at tracking and resolving grievances and complaints in a timely manner by challenging them to the relevant programs or agencies, and to ensure that we strengthen institutions to enable our people to take control of their own destinies. Mr. Chairman, Ghana's Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty program is a conditional and unconditional cash transfer. We had about 1,645 beneficiary households in 2008. Today, Ghana can say that we have 213,044 beneficiary households. And for 2018, we intend to increase it to 450,000. We have a national health insurance scheme that covers 9,648,361 people. Out of that, 13,816 are prison inmates. We have the Ghana School Feeding Program that covered 1.6 million children last year, and this year we've increased it to 2.1 million. Our feeding program is an opportunity to create markets for poor farmers and women and employment avenues for our farmers. The labor-intensive public works program has provided temporary employment to 167,233 beneficiaries, and I am happy as a woman that the majority of the beneficiaries are female. Bad debts and bad roads, inadequate good water supply, inadequate access to health and facilities in terms of education deepen poverty in our country. But we have the Education Capitation Grant, which seeks to provide and sustain free and compulsory basic education for all children. It is important that, Mr. Chairman, in this august house, for us to understand that our president has recently initiated the free senior high school program for students in Ghana to enjoy their right to education. And 90,000 young people are estimated to have enrolled in September last year, who otherwise would have been left out or dropped out of high school due to poverty. With this transformational free SHS initiative, the future of young Ghanaians is secured to enable us manage our lives better. We linked the programs with Planting for Food and Jobs, and then the One District, One Factory, to ensure that Ghana's agriculture and industrialization program is modernized, and to ensure food self-sufficiency, and for us to say no to hunger. There's no point in dreaming when you are hungry. You need to dream on a full belly so that you can reach out for the stars. It is our aim to ensure surplus for export and value addition through processing while providing employment opportunities for the teeming unemployed youth in agriculture and allied sectors. We have the Operation Get Off the Street down to get all our vulnerable people who are on the streets off for a better life, eradicating the head porter phenomena, where human beings are treated like donkeys, called the Kayaye. We have a 5-year strategic plan to eradicate this phenomena. The provision of cash alone without sustainable livelihoods, income generation, and employment does not provide a sustained exit for poverty. The government of Ghana is therefore creating pathways out of poverty into livelihoods that are sustainable and can contribute towards economic growth and development. The government has therefore initiated the process of developing a more robust productive inclusion strategy as a more sustainable means of addressing extreme poverty and vulnerability beyond cash transfers and into trade for a Ghana beyond aid. The time has come to translate our laws and policies into our native dialects so that our people can have better understanding of their rights and responsibilities. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I wish to state that Ghana's desire to become a poverty-free with zero hunger nation by 2030 is on course. We are leaving nobody behind in spite of our challenges or out of it. No doubt it requires sustaining the gains made over the years, continued collaboration, dialogue, and sharing of experiences at international, national, and subnational levels about what works and what does not work. With a grassroots approach, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to get it right for our vulnerable. And we are determined as a people to unlock opportunities, develop our full potential of our young children and youth, invest in innovative approaches and initiatives for solving our problems, increase monitoring and evaluation to ensure that our strategies for eradicating poverty would indeed achieve meaningful, sustainable development for all our people. Ghana is the pride of Africa in name, and we are working to ensure that it is indeed. We are challenged, Mr. Chairman, and inspired by our expectations of ourselves, our goals and vision of where we want to be and how to get there. To eradicate poverty is what we are deemed to get right. I thank you all for your kind attention.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Ghana. Just if I could repeat my appeal earlier on for delegations to strictly observe to the agreed time limits. We have a very long list of speakers, 84 in total. I give the floor now to His Excellency the Minister for Social Development of Guatemala, who will be the last speaker for this morning. Thank you. You have the floor, sir.
Señor Presidente.
Chair, Guatemala aligns itself with the statement delivered by the delegation of Egypt on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. We also align ourselves with a statement delivered by Costa Rica on behalf of the Group of Friends of Older Persons. In our national capacity, we would like to share some additional thoughts and reflections. There can be no denying that Latin America and the Caribbean is the region which has on average the most inequalities, particularly within countries, and that is particularly true when many other countries are multilingual and multi-ethnic, as is the case for Guatemala. As a middle-income country, we continue to have to tackle structural gaps as well as shortfalls in productivity and other shortcomings, particularly when it comes to access to health and education and basic services. We also need to deal with food insecurity, and these are all aspects which particularly affect the most vulnerable in society, especially older persons. Chair, we are well aware that the eradication of poverty is the overarching goal and purpose of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And we're also aware that it is one of the key goals and outcomes of the World Summit on Social Development, or WSSD. We need to bear in mind at all times that in order to achieve said goal, said objective, there will need to be political buy-in and support from our governments. And we will also need to ensure that there will need to be a crafting of realistic and implementation of poverty addressing strategies and policies. We need proper implementing strategies in order to maintain peace and security, to tackle the increase in inequality, to combat climate change, and to withstand its effects. We also need to take steps to ensure that we have inclusive growth and development, and also to ensure that we seize the opportunities that are presented by technological innovation and the increase in the use of technology and the interconnected nature of the world. These are all things that, as we address that policy gap, we need to address in a holistic manner. And we need to avoid a siloed approach. We need to come at this together. The delegation agrees that in order to promote social development, we need a paradigm shift. We need a new focus in order to ensure that we can tackle in an effective way what are increasingly interconnected and complex problems and issues. We have seen an increase in inequality, in gender inequalities, and in food insecurity inter alia. And we need to be alive to that and respond to that. We adopted the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, and that is the fruit of consensus, a valuable fruit of consensus. It gave us a roadmap guiding us as to where we need to go to tackle inequalities, inequality which affects all vulnerable groups, but in particular older persons and youth. We must follow that roadmap to protect and promote the human rights and the dignity and the fundamental freedoms of these vulnerable groups in society in order to ensure that they can enjoy the highest possible standards of living going forward. Chair, my delegation agrees with the statement delivered by the Secretary-General in his report on sustainable development and poverty. He makes the point that in order to overcome the current challenges that lie before countries, and in particular developing countries, we need a combination of policies that include the strengthening and reshaping of existing trade policies and labour policies in particular. Workplace policies particularly need a close eye kept upon them. We need to focus on boosting employment opportunities and ensuring that we provide fair work for all, as this is crucial for ending poverty. Guatemala has a policy covering the period 2017 to 2020, which explicitly recognizes that the well-being of the population and growth requires a modern, democratic, stable society which makes proper use of existing resources and efficiently manages resources available to the state and focuses on employment and jobs. We have also focused on developing mechanisms for the promotion of reforms, for streamlining the administration, for providing a restructuring of the state architecture to ensure that resources go to those who most need them. This is part of a more transparent, open approach to government, which is based on accountability, citizen participation, access to public information, and public hearings, that the voice of the people is heard. These strategic steps go hand in hand with the priorities and guidelines contained in the CACTUM National Development Programme called Our Guatemala 2032. A particular pillar that I would draw your attention to is our determination by 2032 to be a state which guarantees human rights and which promotes development. And that provides for a framework for guiding state action, which is focused not just on delivering growth, but ensuring that growth goes hands in hand with social inclusion to meet development challenges. Chair, on the issue of older persons, Guatemala is aware that the needs of this group of society need to be met, and it is difficult to meet those needs, but not impossible. Older persons often lack the mechanisms that would allow them to have their own income. They often lack options and opportunities to have a decent job, and they often fall through the social net. Well, I would add to all of that the issue of violence. Many older persons suffer violence. as often as they are no longer a productive part of the family, they are seen merely as a burden, which makes them more vulnerable still, and which means that they can often be the target of the violence of other family members. We need, therefore, in response, to strengthen our institutions in order to ensure that they monitor the living standards and the well-being of older persons. As representatives of the government here in this forum, we must work together in order to ensure that we craft an instrument at the end of our deliberations which takes into account the needs and vulnerabilities and rights of older persons. And we must do this if we are to leave no one behind, as the 2030 Agenda calls upon us to do. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Guatemala. I also thank the interpreters and delegates for staying on a little bit over 1 o'clock. We'll do our best to stick to the scheduled time in future. In accordance with the organisation of work, the general discussion of sub-item A and B of Agenda Item 3 will continue tomorrow morning, 30th of January at 10 o'clock. The updated list of speakers will be circulated via e-delegate this afternoon. This afternoon at 3 p.m. sharp in this room, the Commission will hold the high-level panel discussion on the priority theme, Strategies for Eradicating Poverty to Achieve Sustainable Development. I wish you a good lunch and look forward to seeing everybody this afternoon. Thank you.